Oh yeah, I mean, that's easy. That's an easy question. I was in college. I had a boyfriend who was ahead of the game, and he actually sold computers. This is in the early '80s, so he was ahead. He was a geek, like most of the people I like, and he introduced me. We would stay up late playing text adventure games. So the first one I played actually was a Scott Adams game. I think this is the one I played first. Scott Adams game about being in the West. I can't remember the name of it, but it was a Western cowboy game. And I graduated from those two Infocom games, actually, before I worked at Infocom. So.
Well, how you...
No, mine was more kismet, which was I broke up with that boyfriend, and he was moving to some other place, and in kind of a so there kind of thing, I said, well, I'm going to move to Massachusetts, and yeah, I'm going to work for Infocom. Completely out of the blue. It was just trying to get his goat, and it sounded like fun. You know, I happened to be, I had a sister in Massachusetts, so I could go mooch off her, and look, you know, Infocom's there. And I got to Massachusetts on a Thursday. I looked in the newspaper, and the want ads that weekend had a job for 2 testers at Infocom, one for Cornerstone and one for the games. And I applied for them and was interviewed a week later and got the job 2 weeks after that. I mean, I just walked into it. I didn't have to try hard at all.
Right. Now, one of the things that's always hard to... You would have been going into, was it Wheeler or Cambridge Park?
I moved. I started at Wheeler, and they moved in my first month or two.
Okay.
So I got to see both, sort of the end of the old and the beginning of the new. And I was new enough and arrived at a time when everything was expanding, and the excitement was all about Cornerstone and how we're going to be business, we're going to be buttoned down, we're going to be real, none of these game things. And I got caught up in that, even though I was hired on the game side. And so I was all for the move and the cool new building with the glass and the atriums. And it was, I suppose it was an interesting... not a loss of innocence so much, but to see, if I look back at myself, of learning what the mistakes were being made, even as that happened, I was able to sort of experience them myself with getting caught up in the excitement of the new idea, and then seeing how that was really a bad idea for Infocom. And then, of course, I ended up as an imp, so I moved much further into the other side of things. So.
Now, it's always been kind of fuzzy how exactly one went from being...
I have a very first-person narrative view of the whole experience. You know, I can't tell you what it was like in a third-person world. This was the first job I'd had out of college, so I didn't know at the time that it was different from anywhere else. I mean, I knew it was different, but I didn't know how different. I haven't continued working in the games industry, so I don't know how different it was from how games are done now. You know, so that's all I can say. From my experience, I was part of the testers, and we were part of the imps, and I don't know what it was like to be in marketing, really, in a different part of the same company. I can't really talk to that experience. So yes, a call would go out, we're going to get an imp, but I don't know if that was really only 4 of us knew that the call had gone out, or if the whole company knew. That's sort of my thing about not being omniscient. I don't really know what was happening for the other people, and I have learned later that apparently there was this sense of we were the very cliquish in group. The imps, the cliquish of the cliques, and the testers were on the outer margins of that, and moving out in groups. But it didn't feel that way so much to us. So, for my experience, we had so much to us. So, for my experience, we had gone through the layoffs, the Cornerstone disaster, the purchase of Infocom by Activision, and Steve came to me. I was one of his testers, and he came to me some Saturday morning and said, Amy, I think I had told him it would be a goal someday to be an imp or something. It was sort of in the blue sky. And he said, we're going to be hiring an imp someday soon, and after this hiring, because of all the cutbacks and all, there's not going to be another imp hired until one of us dies. So if you're going to go for it, you have to go for it now. So I kind of said, oh, well, what do I do? He said, well, you should write a game. So I wrote a game, and applied, and I think there were other people applying too, but then I got it. So the other side of this is the testing and the imp too, but then I got it. So the other side of this is the testing and the imps worked very closely together. So I mean, it was a perfect springboard to become an imp, because you knew the games and you were able to see how they were being created. You know, it wasn't. I suppose when you get a game completely done, it's hard to imagine all of the steps that went into creating it. But when you're a tester and you've been there from the alpha testing, very early stuff where nothing works and there's not a full story there and there's not a full experience, you have a much better sense, while still being outside of it, of what it's like to create it. So it's a logical next step to try to do it yourself. And Steve helped me. He was the one who said, you know, here's how to do the interpreter. Here's how to, I'm blanking on the words, compile your game, just the steps to the computer side. I had some programming experience, so that wasn't completely out of my experience, but I didn't know how to do it for Zill. So he was able to show me he did not lead me by the hand, but he did sort of lay out what was needed in front of me. So the other side of it was lay out what was needed in front of me. So the other side of it was, again, from my experience from within, the whole company, we were all very young. I was younger than the average, but I was like 22, 23. And the guys, somebody can tell you what the average age. There's a T-shirt that was given to the first person who would age the oldest person in the company. You know, so it was a young company. Most of us were single. We would just live there. It was our home and our family as well as our workplace. So for me to write a game, I would just work. I'd get into work to test, at 9:30, 10. I'd work till 6:30 or 7, and then I'd work on the game for 2 or 3 hours. Go out to dinner with somebody, else who was working late, come back. The company was open and there all the time. And then I worked all weekends. When I was sort of actively in the mindset of, I'm going to become an imp, I have to do this, I was getting up at 6 in the morning and coming in Saturdays and Sundays, too, to write my game on the weekends when I wasn't working. But it wasn't hard. It was just part of the whole culture of the company. I was not alone in this, is what I mean to say. You'd see other people there at the company, not writing their own games necessarily, but there to play games on the computers that we had available or to just hang out, everything. So I guess in that way, it was probably different from other places I've worked.
So Hollywood mentioned to me
any specifics. I had written a really off-the-wall, bizarre little game that came from who knows where about being a tester in a sort of Alice in Wonderland alternate dimension and taking your bugs, which are real metamorphosized bugs, to the imp who was like a caterpillar at a hookah. It was very bizarre and it got around all of the real world things of like ropes, so that my test game that I had done to sort of prove I could do it didn't have any warning signals. I would talk with all of the guys about. It was sort of an open atmosphere for some of us. It was up to the individual imp how much you wanted to share with the others. But I would ask about puzzle problems and things. But I don't remember any advice on that level. I know that Steve did help me decide after I was hired, what should my first game be, and I talked with him about it fairly often. And I do remember him saying he would not have done Plundered Hearts first. Before I started, he said, this is not what I do for my first game because it sounds too hard. And I didn't take his advice on that. But so obviously there was mentoring and discussion going on, but I don't remember specifics like that.
I know that Moriarty, you.
No, I was, I kind of left. I left the company. I was probably a year after Plundered Hearts came out, and I had worked on some other projects. We had troubles finding a project that marketing and administration, I'll call them, wanted me to work on. And I was very frustrated at the time. And we don't have to go into that, or we can. That's up to you. But I could have stayed and done other things. Management, I shouldn't say administration, management and marketing and I could not agree on what to do next. And so management, I shouldn't say administration, management and marketing and I could not agree on what to do next. And some of that was the terrified nature of the company at that point, the downside. I'm just thinking of your talking about the other imps, talking about how wonderful it was, and it really was. I mean, I can say, for me, it was a sad truth that it was the best job I've ever had, and a job I don't think I could ever get again. It was a really, not a job, it was an amazing creative experience with an amazing creative group, and I do think it was something very special and unusual. But I was also there sort of, I came in at the end of the good stuff. And I can even say, I came in at the end of the good stuff, and I know how good it was. And I was there for most of the trajectory into the dissolution of the company. And that was hard. That was hard to go through. So anyway, I could have written more games, but we couldn't come to an agreement about what. And so I left for some personal reasons and for some of that reason.
Do you remember what game?
Well, they tasked me to come up with a game that would have marketing tie-ins. And my personal interests were geekish and not necessarily going to make huge marketing tie-ins. In retrospect, I think some of them would have worked. I had an idea for a vampire game that was roughly based on the Anne Rice books, which is before the movie had come out. So it hadn't hit the mainstream yet. So that's one that I think was a mistake not to have let me follow up on. I had an idea for another series of books or a game based on a series of books about a swashbuckler in the 16th century. That probably wouldn't have gone over big, but it would have been another swashbuckler, not a romance, but a more historical. That one I was a little less interested in because I'd sort of been there, done that with Plundered Hearts, something similar. I had an idea for a Doctor Who game, but this was right at the end of Doctor Who was falling into, not disrepair, but Tom Baker had stopped showing on the American screens, and the new Doctors weren't as exciting, and he was never that huge here anyway. And I don't know that would have been so big either. And I should say, I don't know that it was all management saying, no, you can't do that. It was some combination of me not pushing and them not pushing me. It was a two-way street.
Okay. It or anything else like that?
That was, I will take the credit and the blame. I think that was all my idea. I mean, I think they were fine with me going forward with it. And it wasn't that there hadn't been women writing text adventures before. Even in our company, though, they hadn't been, the main imp. But I think it was a good selling point of, ooh, look. And there was this movement at that time. It's before Brenda Laurel and before... I think it's Purple Moon, which has gone out of business now, but the games for girls. The games that they were coming out for girls at that time were like cooking games. Oh, let's have a sewing game, and which is just benighted. It just the concept that, and they weren't fun to play either. So no wonder girls weren't interested in playing them. And I'm not actually going to claim that Plundered Hearts is a game that girls would be that interested in playing, because I think the mode of play is something that developmentally, teenage girls aren't that interested in doing, sitting down with a computer by yourself. I think Brenda Laurel and some other companies have done good ways of getting games that girls will be interested in playing. But we didn't know that then. And I was interested in writing a romance. I thought a romance might be kind of fun and different. And it had this, this gimmick of, a woman writing for women. So at the time, there were some critical reviews that just hated it because of its over-femminess. And I remember one reviewer just lit into the game because she was trying to karate chop and to do tough guy stuff, and the game wouldn't let her. And so she was criticizing it for not allowing the character to be strong. And we can go into a whole sort of philosophical approach about what a character should be in one of these games. But it was an interesting experiment.
But it's funny.
Which is earlier I wanted to say when asking about Steve giving advice, he may not have needed to give advice because I had read him at the time I was working there, I read an interview with him. I think may have been for Games Magazine that struck me at the time, and I still obviously remember it today, which is, he said, there's this fine line with reality and with setting up how the games, how the rooms are described. He said, if you say you walk into an office, there's a desk there, the player is going to expect the whole world of things that are on a typical desk, a stapler, a phone, a pencil cup. Who knows what they're going to expect? And you don't want to waste your time as an implementer coding in every single possible thing that could possibly be on a desktop when what you really only care about is, the magic pen that's in the pencil cup. Whereas if you say you walk into a wizard's lab or a wizard's cave, who knows what's in a wizard's cave? So you can get away with a lot by setting it in this fantasy environment that people don't have predetermined expectations about what should be in that environment. And so I think that's some of what you're talking about of at the level of the tester's job was not just to find bugs, the rather dull QA of where does the computer crash. It's where does the world that you've invented break down, and what is a reasonable approximation of things that are on the desk, let's say, that people will look for without having to burden the code with everything possible. And you could argue that in Plundered Hearts, I didn't broaden it enough. I didn't get enough of those because people were complaining you can't karate chop or things. Certainly, I know I'm still embarrassed to this day in the final released version. There's a bug that happens in the first couple moves when you do something very logical. And I can't remember what it is right now, but it's a true bug. You get garbage if you type out something like take the box. There's a box under the bed that slides out, and if you take the box rather than grab the box or something that's a logical thing to do, you get garbage from it. So that was a case where the testers had missed, or I missed in my own, I should take responsibility, a very obvious thing to have done at the beginning. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
some of my questions are stories designed to help you remember where.
Boy, I used a parser that was already done, and I had to strip it way down. I don't know if probably nobody has told you my story, which was they gave me, because it was my first game, they gave me 9 months to write it, and I finished it in 6. And then spent the next 3 just cutting stuff out. It was way, way too big to fit, because I was the last game to fit on, I think it was the Commodore 64. So there was all that great stuff that had to be cut. And so I did a lot of cutting, but I started with a black box parser. And I don't think I started with any other game. I mean, I could be, because it was a different, it was just coming at things differently. If I did, it would have been Prism, because it was, in my mind, it was the most like A Mind Forever Voyaging, which we called Prism in development. But I'm pretty sure I didn't, because that was so huge that I would have spent my first 6 months just cutting stuff out of that to make it small enough to build on.
Some of the games are, okay, I've been assigned the romance game.
No, it was very, very clear. I think they would have been happier for me not to have done romance game first. It's not like I railroaded them into it, but I think there was definitely, hey, let's do something for women, so we can do the whole women writing for women. We can get that whole new market, because it was definitely at the time, the whole time I was essentially, after my first 6 months at Infocom, it was all the beginning of the end. And so there was a panic underlying everything of, where is the next Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy? And that's that would be my anger, is after Plundered Hearts, he said, well, that's good. You didn't sell very many, dear. It wasn't quite that condescending, but it was almost. It was, just go out and just write us another game that will sell 150,000 copies, which none of the other games had done except for Hitchhikers, which still sold like 400,000 copies. So it was this impossible task that was laid on. And, we don't want to burden you with telling you what to do. You just write us a hit. And it was very frustrating for me, because I had perhaps bitten off more than I could chew with my first game in trying a different genre and a different play, a type of play, for an entirely new market that then, again, this is something I don't know a lot about, because I was kind of the innocent newbie throughout the whole experience. But from what I was told at the time, sales didn't know what to do with, Activision sales didn't know what to do with the Infocom games. They're sold to a slightly different market, a different kind of player. It's a very different kind of play at the time. Sitting down for 150 hours with a game was not the same as Pong, So it was, I could blame the lack of sales on things far beyond my ability to control. But it also probably was being marketed to the wrong group and the people who would be interested weren't interested in playing computer games. So marketing was not unaware of that, to bring it back to the question, which is, no, they did not say, here, sit down, you have to write a game, a romance. So I think they played on that after the fact to have something to talk about, about the game. But I don't even remember what else I had in mind for the first game. I had, in high school, thought I would write romance novels when I was going to be a grown-up. So writing a romance seemed to be a logical thing to do, and something different. But no, it did not come from outside. If I can say, actually, I would, in retrospect, when I saw Pirates of the Caribbean, the first movie, I thought that's what I was trying to do. That movie is what I was trying to get my game to play like, that whole experience. And Wishbringer was the other game that I loved, the double layer of Wishbringer, of able to play it without magic and with magic. And in the end, I didn't have any magic in the romance, but that's sort of, I should say, what I was trying to do with Plundered Hearts was have a way you could play it just as an adventure, and then a way you could play it as a romance. Steve did it more successfully in Leather Goddesses of Phobos, I'd say. If you tongue-in-cheek romance for kind of sexy stuff, you could do the joke of you could play it as a straightforward game, or you could play it for all the sex jokes.
Right.
So anyway, that's all. I think we might have a door.
Or seeing it used somewhere or anything like that?
Well, not immediately. The initial response was disappointment. I don't take that personally. I think every game that didn't sell 150,000 at that point was met with internally disappointment. Not in the imps, but marketing and management were like, oh darn, we didn't get it that time. Go make us a hit. Come on, do it next time. But what was it? And given that it sold a paltry 30,000 at the time that the average game was selling 60,000, I think, it was a surprise when 10 years later, I'm in graduate school in Minnesota, and somebody, a high school or a college kid, knocks on my door and says, "Are you the Amy Briggs? I played Plundered Hearts in 5th grade. It was my sister's game, but I played it with her." I always make clear that the guys were only playing it because it was their sister's game. And that was a great experience for me. I just want to thank you. That was a surprise to have this undercoming, and not so much. I mean, I kind of expect something from being part of Infocom, but to have apparently there are people who really think my game is really good, and that it I wouldn't say it changed their lives, but it made a difference in their lives, and they remembered it not as, oh, it's the failed game of that year, which is sort of how I felt about it at the time, of a failed experiment. So that was kind of a surprise.
I guess if they wanted the success of Hitchhiker's Guide, they would have, as you tried to work together in a medium.
That's why the vampire thing surprised me that they didn't. I think it was a combination of maybe me not pushing hard enough. She was not as famous as she is now. I mean, she'd only written, I think, 2 of the books at that point, maybe 3. And that wasn't big enough. I did get pressure. I had worked on Prairie Home Companion, and I, as an usher for years, and knew Garrison. I had potlucks in Garrison Keillor's kitchen. You know, I won't say we were close personal friends, but you know, there was pressure. Hey, see if you can get Garrison Keillor, and that surprises me actually in retrospect, because he's much bigger now than he was in the '80s. But he at least was a name. Anne Rice was still kind of this kind of culty vampire person. So I don't know why that idea didn't take off more. Now, I was assigned to the long list of people writing the Douglas Adams Restaurant at the End of the Universe. That was, I don't know if that was the first, I think that came up when I didn't have a good game of my own. They said, here, you will write the next big hit because it will be the next Douglas Adams game. And it wasn't, it was after Bureaucracy, and it wasn't, or maybe it was the same time as Bureaucracy. But anyway, it was a sequel to Hitchhikers. And a lot of imps' careers died in that game. At the time I came on, Douglas was completely unattached to the project. He just didn't want to hammer it through. I never met him person. I stood in the room with him once right after I was hired, like the day after I started. He came through and was introduced to another tester, but I wasn't on his game at that point, so I didn't get to meet him. But so he was not attached to the project, and then it was handed off to other people. And in the end, I was told seriously that I was going to be writing the game with a programmer at, I think it was at Magnetic Scrolls, a competitor's company, who was going to tell me how to write the game, and then I was just going to be, the old-fashioned meaning of the word implementing. I was just going to be doing the coding for it. And at that point I said, no, this is absurd, so I quit on that project. So.
You quit the project, you quit the company on that project?
It was all at the same time, it wasn't.
Oh, so it was like a standard breakup.
That was that was just.
The house isn't clean, you didn't take care of the dog, I'm doing bad at work, you know what, I'm getting my bags.
Yeah, I mean, I can't remember the exact timing actually, but it was in the same period, so.
I do have historical stuff about, for instance, bureaucracy, and it is, so that's fine.
I think it was panic. And I think what made Infocom so great when it was great was exactly what killed us. As I understand it, what happened was they formed the company to be a button-down, 3-piece suit with vest and tie business company. But look, we've got these games, we'll make money off the games, and then we'll use that for the real stuff. And they ignored the games, which is exactly what you need for creative foment, for good stuff to happen. They ignored the games. They threw a little bit of money at us, not near as much as they should have done if we wanted to stay alive in the games world, because that wasn't the point. And then they funneled off all that money and put it into the grown-up stuff. And that allowed the games people to do what they did best. They just they were ignored and pleasantly neglected, which allowed this group of really brilliant people, excluding myself from that, just come together and create really wonderful things and a great environment. I mean, it was just a really wonderful environment. And then when Cornerstone died and the end started happening, suddenly there was this need to make themselves totally understandably human nature. Oh my gosh, we have to now survive on what we were doing before and make all of our hopes and dreams about the grown-up business side, now we've got to apply to the game side, and applying a micromanagement finger to that side, which is exactly what killed it. So, I mean, it's kind of through the neglect that it was allowed to become great, and then through trying to capitalize on that greatness that it killed it, I think. Killed the quality. I don't know that the games are bad. I would just, the late games, I would just say that they're trying too hard. It's too much. Not let Lebling go off and come up with another great game on his own, because he's done it before. Trust us, he'll do this again. We have to make sure that it's going to be a win before he gets out of the gate, which you just can't do.
So, from the games industry was rather young.
Yeah, I didn't plan on it. It just kind of happened. I could have sort of kept thinking, well, I'll go back there someday, and then I realized it had moved on without me.
Yeah, I didn't. I retired when I was 26, and I was like, well, to write.
Yes. I keep doing that. I've done that periodically in my life. I'm going to write the great American novel. And actually, that was a mistake. I was going to just write a novel. And they had this huge party for me when I left Infocom, and they gave me a T-shirt, which I still have, which was the 1989 winner of the Pulitzer Prize, which suddenly put these expectations on it that kind of killed that in the bud, so...
Oh, did it actually stunt your interest in it, or?
I'm still interested in it, and I'm still kind of trying to do it, but I've never written that novel, no. I keep finding other things to do, so I wonder if I really do want to write the novel, or if I just want to keep dreaming about writing the novel.
Well, there's something to be said for that.
Mm-hmm.
So, let's see, what I'm going to do...
Yep.
So, because by that point, Wheeler's probably already starting to be in
Wheeler,
boxes.
when I first saw it, was already in boxes, yeah. It was a dark little place full of boxes. So, I'll start talking about the imp life, but I could also probably talk about the testers. The building is still around today, I think, and I think it's 6 stories tall, and we were on the 5th floor, and it was what is now, I'm sure, very dated, all glass on the outside with quite beautiful glass atriums from bottom to top in the middle. And it was all very buttoned down. So I'd arrive whenever I felt like getting up. And I was living in, oh gosh, I lived all over Boston at that time, but I was living on the T. So it was an easy T trip out and then just a walk of 3 blocks over to Cambridge Park. And you go up the elevator and you're surrounded by, buttoned down places. You walk in, we've got a formal reception area and everything's kind of light. And I should say colorless, not light in a good way. It's all colorless, and there's gray carpet, and there's white walls, and there's no... the thing Wheeler had going for it is it even though when I knew it, it was dark and in boxes, there was a sense of actual artisanship there. I don't actually know if it was just a rundown place, but that was the feeling of it. There was no artisanship at Cambridge Park. And we took up like half the floor around one atrium, and it was all divided up with because when we moved in, we were going to take over the whole floor, and I have some memory that maybe we even did rent the whole floor for a while, and then in the cutbacks, they got rid of some of the space, but it was largely empty. So we had you'd walk into reception with marketing, and then beyond that you go, geez, you can go to the right and go to the imps, go to the left, and you get to the testing area, and go further to the left and around the building, you'd be where they developed the parser and Tim Anderson and the guys who I considered the real programmers work. I misspoke, not the parser, the interpreters were written over there, and then administration, the big guys were down the hall by themselves in a corner. And the imps area has probably been described. We had what we called a bowling alley. It was a very large open room with windows at the end, and it was on the corner of the building. So all of the imps on the north side had windows in their offices with John Palace on the corner, and then a big series of windows for the bowling alley, and then a line of offices on the south side with Steve Moretsky had the south side windowed office, and then the rest of us had the closed-in offices on the south side. And we did talk about the north side kids and the south side kids. And the north side were the real programmers, and the south side were just the dabblers who had the creative ability and were struggling with the programming. That was the myth, because of course Steve was on the south side, but he wasn't considered one of the real programmers, and he didn't have a computer science degree, but he definitely, in that, deserved to be on the north side. I think he kind of enjoyed being on the south side. So the south side was me, Jeff O'Neill, and Hollywood, who actually was not on the south side. It was on the east side, but it was also a windowless office. I think the intent had been to, when we got up and running and were famous, assuming that even we're going to have games, that there would be cubicles in the center of that big area, and then we'd have games just routing out our ears from all the people working all at once. So you'd show up when you'd show up. I don't remember ever being rushed, and I'm not a morning person, so I don't think it was an early time. The doors were always open, except in few cases when people didn't want to be bothered. But it was actually a really wonderful way to work. All of the imps, we were all working on our own projects separately, but in a shared environment. And for me, it was kind of the perfect environment, because you had the sense of we're all working together on something, but I didn't have to share my work with anybody else. There was no need to actually work with partners. Other people work well with partners, I don't, but I had the team support without the individual butting in. You would say hi. You'd sit down. I would work. On a good day, I would forget the time had passed, and I kind of come into myself 6 hours later, realizing I'd forgotten to have lunch. We worked on old-fashioned amber monitors plugged into a mainframe. It's kind of hard to even remember how basic. It felt very high-tech at the time, but it was nothing like the cheapest computer out today. the day would end around supper time, the formal day, frequently with a boggle party, or not party, but a boggle game, which, gosh, I wish I could get this. Probably available now, but for many years it was not possible to have an intranet boggle game. So we would all be playing. It would be whoever signed up, usually imps and testers, playing boggle on the computer for half an hour or so. And then some people would go home. If they had families, they would go home to the families. Others of us would stay and work later. Steve, by the way, was by far the best boggle player, and I always thought that I was a poor player because Steve would beat the pants off me and everybody else, partly just because he's the fastest typist I've ever known. So you could think of the word and it would already be typed out for him. I have since discovered that I have not been beaten by anybody in boggle ever since I left Infocom. So I guess I'm pretty good too, but Steve was supreme. Every week, one day a week, we'd have an IMPS lunch where we would get together and formally, officially share how the game was going, bring up problems, ask for help. Tom Snyder Productions would come to those. Other outside groups. Bob Bates, when he was sort of working for us but not yet part of the group, would come to those lunches. They were semi-formal. I think Bruce, what's his name, the head of Activision, came to one of them. Bruce, doesn't ring a bell. Bruce is what we called him.
The lawyer?
The CEO.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when
who hated Infocom.
Yeah. He came to one of those lunches, and that was a tense lunch. But those were, and I guess, I was the girl. I was the one who ran out to get the food. John and I would share that, and I still don't think that was because I was the girl. I got paid less than anybody else, but I don't think it was because I was the girl. It was because I was the last hired in that group, and I was told before I started, we're paying the other guys a lot more than you, but we just don't have the money now. Now, maybe if I had not been a girl, they wouldn't have cut that way. I don't hold it against them, whoever they might be, but it was the true fact that I was the one who would get the lunches, and I was the one who would frequently got the Friday party supplies too. But I also kind of like to do that, so I would volunteer. And at the IMPS lunches, it was, it was a supportive atmosphere. I don't recall. I mean, I know there must have been fights between imps, and I know that there were fights between imps, but I don't recall anything at these lunches among us except sort of support of, geez, I've got a puzzle, I can't figure out how to solve it, it's boring, how do we solve this puzzle? Or we didn't do coding questions because sitting around a lunch table is not a good place to do coding problem solving. So that wasn't the kind of thing we discussed. That you'd walk over to Stu Galley is usually the person I'd check in with. I mean, depended what you were looking for. Stu was the person I go to for parser stuff, Loveling for really complex stuff in programming, Steve for real questions for comedy, how to make something funny, or just how to get out of a pickle in the story. And then at the imp lunches, it was all just a free-for-all of people talking and suggesting. So that would pretty much be how it would work. It was everybody working on their own thing but together, and it worked pretty well that way.
So, and of course a couple people were remote, but that's the way those things are. Because it's there.
On the cover.
It's on the cover, the marketing interviews you. The
game packaging, when I was there, it's changed from all the wonderful, unique packaging to the look of a matching set of books. I mean, it fits in with that. That was very, very definitely the perception. And the perception from within that, yeah, we really were the best. And it's arrogant, I suppose, but maybe it's true. I don't know. We certainly have been remembered well. So we didn't need to... We were above we weren't doing just games. We were doing experiences, environments, and they were more like books. That's how we saw them.
Yeah, so, yeah, would not have any way of knowing, but you know and you want them to know.
Right. I'm not sure. I can say, I think of Infocom, the theme song in the back of my head is Camelot, Camelot, which I can't sing right now, but it was kind of this moment of glory. And it's not to say that it couldn't happen again. I look at the games coming out now, which I don't look at too closely. I'm not big into games. But I don't know. I think some of what made Infocom so great was this individual vision that they were able to, that the style of the game and the ability with the text adventure. It is a book. I'll go strongly. It is a book, just done a little differently. You get an individual vision in a different way than you do when you're having to hire voice. What do they call them? Voice actors. Mark Hamill has to be in this, and we got to have graphics, and we got to have certain algorithms for the fight scenes and things. It doesn't surprise me that many of the games, the commercial games today, are more and more like sort of absent Hollywood movies. It's because it's the only way you can make something that looks like that. And I do think it's kind of amazing the underground amateur games that there are. Maybe they aren't underground to people who are there, but because my response is, why would I want to? It's an unlearned response. I want to say this is not educated. It's why would I want to commit to 100 hours of playing some unknown's game? I want the stamp of somebody put some money behind this. I have to pay for this to make it worthwhile to prove that it's good. But probably those games are as engaging as any other book that's written today. And I would think probably for me and the kind of interests I have, more engaging than Halo. So it's not quite fair to compare Halo with Plundered Hearts, but anyway. So I don't know that I have anything to say that hasn't been said by other people or isn't well known.
There's a lot less shooting in Plundered Hearts than Halo.
There is.
There's a ton.
Though there are a lot of deaths in Plundered Hearts. And that was...
There's a lot less shooting in Plundered Hearts than Halo.
There is.
There's a ton.
Though there are a lot of deaths in Plundered Hearts. And that was strictly because I was trying to keep it easy on the idea that it was supposed to be this new market of people who hadn't played. And I didn't have a good way of making the puzzles easier, better hints or something. So I just have you die before, and it was to make it easy. You just die so that I didn't have to get a puzzle to get out of whatever it was. And also I didn't have the space because I was so cramped for space. It was easier to die than to have a landing room that, if you step off the cliff or something. Apropos, very specific point about Plundered Hearts.
Yeah, I like the phrase landing room. See, that's a good example of someone who has an implementation in their background.